What's the strangest gut feeling you've ever had that ended up being right? Story 1. My wife made a new friend at work. One night, we went to her and her BF's house so I could meet them. Something felt off as soon as we got there, but I chalked it up to the house being in pretty bad shape. Just gross. Roaches and such. Then the BF got home, and I've never felt dread like that when shaking his hand. He seemed normal and something just gave me major creeps and had my hackles raised. Couple weeks later, he's on the front page of the local paper for having imprisoned a woman in their basement and assaulting her for weeks. She was very likely right beneath our feet while we were there. Story 2. Not my gut feeling, but my friends. I used to go out with a group of bikers and I'd ride pillion on the back with one of the guys because my bike was too small and couldn't keep up. Every Sunday morning for years. One day he calls me up and says he's not taking me. I immediately worry I've upset him, he's annoyed with me or something, but he assures me it's nothing I'd done. He just felt like he needed to go alone that day. No reason. He rode right into a flock of sheep in the road, crashed spectacularly to the point where my pillion seat actually got ripped off his bike. He gave it to me for Christmas framed. Story 3. A good friend got new neighbors across the street. Older couple. They quickly became like surrogate parents to my friend and her husband. Heard about them all the time. Finally had the chance to ace to meet them at an event at our local sports bar. I took one look at the dad guys, Teddy, and told my friend, "Wow, you did tell me he's really sick." She said he's not. I said, "The hell he's not, he's like sick." She asked me how I knew. I said IDK look at him. I just knew he was seriously ill, even though he was just hanging out in a sports bar, drinking a beer and being a typical 55-ish year-old guy. Wasn't even that gray. Wasn't obese or anything. Something about his eyes, his skin, just gave me the heebie-jeebies in a way that said, this guy is dying. Apparently to everyone else, he looked fine normal. Friend said I was nuts. A week later, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She called me and said, "You're not gonna believe this," and something about me being a witch. And he passed away 3 weeks after. Story 4. An ex-boyfriend of mine was sleeping at his job after his girlfriend dumped him. He had nowhere to go. I went to take some pillows and a blanket. He asked me to lay with him because he was lonely. I said okay. After about 10 minutes, I said, "We have to go. I can't stay here." I couldn't explain it, but said I was leaving and he needed to come with me. That night, friends of the ex-girlfriend broke into the job and stole the safe. They weren't nice people. He got blamed for the robbery, so he quit the job. Years later, the ex told him she set him up. Glad I wasn't there for the break-in. I've never felt a compulsion like that before, but I'm glad I listened to my intuition. Story 5. My first year of college, I was sitting on the campus field and reading. A guy comes up to me and asks if we can chat together. I got a very nasty feeling in my gut about it, and him in general. But because I had made a very good friend in almost the exact same way a few weeks prior, I brushed it off and decided not to be rude. He approached me being very smiley and friendly. The whole conversation basically consisted of me politely asking questions to get to know him better, while he gave very short answers and avoided eye contact while sitting way too close to me. I brushed it off as him being nervous and personal space being seen differently in his family. Well, then he put me in a headlock and tried to kiss me. Thankfully, this was during COVID, so I was wearing a mask, but he kept trying to pull it down. I froze up and tried to pull his arm away, but he kept yanking me towards him. It was not gentle. I ended up digging my nails into his hand, and after what felt like eternity, he got up and left. Well, lesson learned on my part. Story 6. Ex-wife and I took a bunch of kids to an amusement park for my son's 6th birthday party. She drove one car full of kids and I drove another. We took everyone back to our house where the parents could retrieve them. The guests were all neighborhood kids. My ex arrived home first. And when I pulled up in front of the house and parked, my ex walked up to my car window. She was coming from the corner where she had walked some of the kids home. I was still in my car, and I noticed she had a worried look on her face, and somehow I instantly knew our friend and neighbor, Bob, was dead. Bob and his wife had twins about 6 months old, and he had given her a present of an overnight spa experience. She had gotten home and found him dead in bed minutes before we got back with the kids. Their twins were safe in their crib where they had been all day. Bob had passed away in the night after putting them to bed. My ex was returning from the neighbors that lived across the street. Bob's twins did not come to my son's party. They were much younger, so I never understood why my mind immediately went to Bob when I saw the look on my wife's face. But she was still 10 feet away, and I knew Dot knew before she opened her mouth. Story 7. One day I woke up to head to my night shift and had some messages on my phone from my mom's friends saying they couldn't get hold of her and they were worried. Nothing too unusual. Happened a fair bit because she had so many friends and sometimes couldn't keep up with messaging them all. I called her, rang out, called her again, and it to the sky up. Okay, she was busy, but I decided to go check on her anyway. She only lived down the road. As I was leaving the house, I got this weird feeling. I asked my boyfriend to go with me. Thank God we did, because we found her dead at the bottom of the stairs at the age of 63. My boyfriend followed the emergency line instructions and did the CPR amazingly while we waited for paramedics to come and pronounce her. I don't know if I'd have had the strength to do it without him. She'd fallen the night before. No way of knowing. But as I left my house to go over, I just thought, she's dead. Story 8. We were at a party about 10 years ago. The guys were out back, drinking and talking. One of them, the husband of one of my wife's friends, goes on and on about his weekly trips for work as a wine distributor. He was so full of himself, that whole Paul Giamatti Miles vibe from Sideways. Highfalutin over the top stuff about the wine, about himself. Several of us were rolling our eyes at him. I said to my wife privately after the party, he's got another family. That's why he travels so much. Just pure intuition and speculation on my part, out of the blue. About 8 years later, so about 2 years ago, guess what? They're getting divorced because he has been leading a double life. He has another family about 20 miles away. He got found out because he was on a plane with the other woman, and an acquaintance from his other life recognized him. He weaseled, saying she's a co-worker, but the friend took a picture of her and sent it around. Tongues got to flapping, and the picture from the plane eventually made its way to the first wife. I wasn't the only one over the years thinking he had 2 wives, but I was the first to think of it and openly say it. Pure gut feeling about someone. Story 9. When I was in high school, I went on a group trip that included a visit to an observatory. There was a big dome with a telescope on the 2nd story of the building, and you had to go up a ladder to get up there. A bunch of my friends were already up there checking it out and saying how cool it was, so I started climbing up. The moment my head was inside the dome, I suddenly felt ridiculously uneasy and said, without thinking, someone passed away in this room. I immediately climbed back down the ladder and found the tour guide and asked, did anything ever happen up there? He looked nervous and hesitated, but then said, well, an astronomer hanged himself from the telescope in the 1940s. I was absolutely horrified and went outside and refused to go back in for hours until it was time to leave. Not long ago, it dawned on me that this having happened in the early aughts when you couldn't just look everything up online, I never actually verified the tour guide's story. So I Googled it and yup, 100% true. It was reported in the New York Times when it happened. Story 10. I gave my ex my old cell phone because his broke. I had a strange feeling, like he was cheating on me. I didn't have anything concrete. Because I felt so uncomfortable, I ended the relationship. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing, but when he gave me my phone back, I wanted to delete the photos he had taken with it. And then I saw a picture of him with someone else. Thanks for the confirmation. D, if you hadn't forgotten to delete this picture, I would probably still be wondering if I'm crazy. There were many times when I had a strange feeling and it turned out to be right. But often I had a strange feeling, but nothing happened. But who knows, maybe something bad would have happened. We should always listen to our gut feeling. It has never hurt. Story 11. More of a positive one. But I remember waiting to go into a job interview. It was my first ever job interview and first ever job, but in my head, I just knew I'd land the job. I had no doubt about it and was looking forward to working there without the interview even starting yet. I made the managers laugh, impressed them with my knowledge of the company, and was hired before I had left the room. One of the managers even later confessed to wanting to hire me before the interview due to the skills and experience I had. But of course they had to follow proper procedures and interview me regardless. I worked there for 2 years exactly before being let go due to budget cuts. Was the best job experience ever by far. Story 12. I had to leave for an appointment, and for some reason I felt the urge to just sit in my car before leaving. I've sat there just looking around for 2 minutes or so. Then the feeling went away, and I left. When I was on the highway, I saw a crash happen just minutes before I was supposed to be there. Truck blew a tire, hit other cars which hit other cars as well. It was a mess. 2 people passed away. A few others heavily injured to the hospital. I was in the traffic behind the scene for about 2 hours and was so glad I just sat in my car just staring around before leaving. I still do that sometimes, thinking back to that moment. Story 13. I was out with my co-workers at a dive bar where we would go frequently after work. One night I noticed a woman who was on a date and her body language was just off. The guy was super tall and had an energy and posture that was creepy. She seemed uncomfortable, and at one point I noticed her try to get up and he grabbed her wrist and yanked her. Alarm bells went off in my head, and when she was in the bathroom I went in and asked if she was okay. She had a red mark on her wrist and she looked shaken up. I asked if she wanted to leave, and she just nodded. I told her to follow my lead, and we went back out to my group of co-workers, and I said, "Look who I found! Susan's cousin! She's headed with us to the next place. Let's go!" She left out the back door with us and we walked her to her car. I never actually got her name, but we hugged and she thanked us. I just felt the violence rolling off of that guy like a fog and couldn't live with myself if I didn't check on her. Story 14. I have a lot of gut feelings. The last one was pretty intense. Usually they are small and it triggers mostly when meeting people. This one was last week's Thursday, saving my partner from being hit by a scooter. Yay! We were on a bike pedestrian lane, and at our left was 2 or 3 lanes of cars, so there was a lot of noises. The rest of the story happened in like 1 or 2 seconds. Suddenly felt a big urge and tickles on my neck. Nothing was ahead. No car, bikes, or else coming at us from this direction. Then feeling a kind of attraction behind me on the left. I don't know how to better describe it. It's like the Spider-Man sense. I just knew something was coming before my eyes connect to it. Turning my body to see if something was coming. Grabbing my partner's arm on the way. Saw something coming really fast in my peripheral vision. Pull her to me as the scooter was passing on our left way to fast. Probably saved her from an hospital journey or worse. I don't know which of my senses were triggered to explain the urge. I'm just glad she is okay. Story 15. I had these weird feelings for a while that something bad was going to happen. I shrugged it off as maybe I was paranoid or whatever. I told my partner at the time to call his parents to check on them, and I called mine. All was well, so I just went about my day. I couldn't shake this idea that something was still going to happen. However, it was late, and I knew family would be in and asleep for the night. I had to take some medicine to help me sleep just to get over that massive pit in my stomach. I crashed out, and when I woke up, there were 20 missed calls from my family. I was in panic mode trying to call someone back, and finally, I got a hold of my mom, who told me my dad had a major heart attack. I didn't know what to think other than if I had actually known what it was, then maybe something could have been done. He ended up needing a triple bypass and said he was lucky. I was deemed the cat of the family quickly. Story 16. Had a strained on-off relationship with my brother for years. We had a big fight and went no contact for a while. I was intellectually checked out because of years of arguments, so I didn't put too much thought into feeling my feelings for weeks. One night I break down at home, thankfully with someone there, and start crying and talking about him. Had a gut feeling something was wrong, but he was with my dad, so I didn't call. Couple of hours later, as I'm finally trying to sleep while still breaking down, my other brother calls me to tell me our brother has passed away. My father had arrived home and started the process of calling the cops, ambulance, my cousin, etc. At the exact time my mental breakdown started, I should have called. Story 17. Fairly recently, my husband and I were driving home after a show one night that was about 2 hours away. We were nearly home, 15 minutes away. He was driving, and I was on my phone looking up something regarding our conversation. I was looking at my screen for a while when I had this gut-feeling voice say to me, "Put down your phone." I did. Maybe 10 minutes later, there were 2 huge bucks in the middle of the road. Before I saw them, I saw their eyes and just managed to say, "Slow down," as they came into view. My husband was able to brake quickly. We still hit one of the deer, but he only had a tumble while the other ran off. My husband's car was wrecked, but not so bad we could at least drive it home that night versus getting a tow in rural MI at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. We weren't hurt at all, but I feel like if I didn't feel that and start paying attention, this would have been a lot worse. Story 18. In 2020, peak pandemic, I had the feeling I needed to reach out to an old coworker I hadn't talked to 3 years. We weren't even work friends, but I could not shake the feeling I needed to reach out. I didn't have a way of reaching out to her directly, so I called my work bestie who worked with her too. She had the same feeling. We started reaching out to people she was close with and eventually learned she'd moved to another state, was loving alone. This was the height of the pandemic and had a full-blown psychotic break. We were able to get in touch with her landlord who found her, and her family came to help her. I still haven't talked to her, but I am so glad I didn't ignore that feeling. Story 19. Oh, I have a fun one. I had a group of friends that I had started hanging out with during the summer. We would sometimes go out and play around at parks or chill at one of their houses. A few times I tried to coordinate these meetups by texting some of the others and insisting they tell me later when they figure something out for sure. But there were multiple times that they didn't get back to me until much later in the day. These responses were often something like, "Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing this. We just went to such and did so and so." Well, this happened enough times that I began to think it was very coincidental that we would be texting back and forth right up until the point that I sent a message about wanting to hang out that day. We used Snapchat, so I could see that they conveniently stopped opening the messages whenever it had to do with hanging out. Well, my brother knew much more about Snapchat than I did, so I asked him specifically, "Hey, is there some kind of way that you can read someone's messages without letting them know you had read it?" He confirmed that you indeed could, and showed me how. So my instinct was correct, and my friends were purposely reading my messages in a way that didn't let me know they were reading, and then making it seem like they just hadn't seen them until it was too late. Then they would go hang out behind my back after I was the one who initiated the entire thing. I almost wish they would have just said they didn't want me around. Story 20. So it wasn't me, but my aunt. Every single Thanksgiving for the last 10 to 12 years I've spent with my great aunt and uncle in North Carolina. One year my aunt calls me up and she says that I should come to Thanksgiving with them this year in Georgia and not North Carolina. I was kinda confused, but she just stressed that she had a feeling I should be there. She couldn't put a finger on it. I remember she sounded really serious, so I decided to shift plans and spend Christmas in North Carolina instead. We went to Georgia, and my dad's side of the family had a really big Thanksgiving dinner, and my great-grandma was there. I had gotten somewhat close to her over the last few years, and literally the day after Thanksgiving she wound up in the hospital. And then 3 days later she had passed. My aunt could never explain it, because even though she was in her older years, there were no immediate signs that she would be passing at that particular time. Story 21. I remember one time I went out with my then girlfriend, now wife, and her friends, and one of her friends was a bit of a train wreck. She had emotional breakdowns often and had a long string of partners, none of whom seemed to last more than a couple of weeks. Anyway, this time we went out to a lake on a hot summer day. We all must have been 18, 19, 20, and this friend had a guy with her who must have been at least 24, 25. Never seen him before, but he seemed friendly enough. Because him and I were the only two guys there, we were kinda paired up, and he seemed okay, but something just seemed off with him. Couldn't quite place it. He didn't really say or do anything to make me feel skeevy, but I couldn't shake it. I was friendly with him, but didn't exactly start spilling my guts or getting too chummy. However, a few hours later, once he'd had a bit to drink, he decided to let me in on a little secret. He pulled back his lower lip to reveal a flipping swastika tattoo, which I could only imagine was one of several. He showed it like it was a point of pride, which immediately made me rethink my entire character. Because why did he feel so comfortable showing asterisk me asterisk? We were all just some bored kids from the suburbs. It was one of those "am I the baddies?" moments that made me consider what I say and do and whether it appeals to the good people or the bad people. I'd like to say it was a changing moment for me that made me a lot more considerate of the people I spent time with. Story 22. When I first started going out with my GF, she introduced me to her friend group, which consisted of 4 girls and 2 guys. Straight away, I got a really bad vibe off one of the guys. He was in a relationship with one of the girls. Everyone in the group seemed to think he was really cool and funny, but I felt like something was slightly off. I mentioned to my GF after that I had a bad feeling about him, like a creepy feeling. She insisted that I was wrong, that he was a lovely guy and I was just being jealous and paranoid. Fast forward 6 months, and it turns out he was cheating on his GF. She found out when she had seen on his laptop that he was messaging women on OF, and this led her to creeping on his phone to verify he was seeing another woman. Felt quite validated after this as I was made out to be paranoid and jealous of him. Story 23. Family member's daughter gets married. The entire family comes to our state to visit and meet new husband. I host a cookout at my house, met the new husband. While grilling, my mom comes out and asks what I thought of new husband. Told her I felt there was something off about him. Mom tells me to him some slack, that I always feel that way about new people. A couple of days later, the new husband starts having severe stomach pains. His FEL says he needs to go to the hospital, and the new husband says he can't go. I guess after some discussion, everyone finds out he was not supposed to leave his home state. He was on probation from a candy arrest that no one knew about. After they left to go back their home state, I told my mom, "Told you so." Story 24. Ran into some friends from high school in the early part of my sophomore year in college. Was a girl there that I'd had a thing for. We chatted for a bit and she asked if I wanted to hang out with them. Considered it and was about to say yes, and a friend of hers said her boyfriend just pulled into the parking lot. Was a little disappointed and something told me I wouldn't have a good time. Told her I had something I needed to do early in the morning and couldn't make it. Not a lie, but had she been single, I would have made the time. They saw their movie. I saw mine. They went their way. I went home. Woke up the next morning. Went to class, the whole thing. And I dropped by my dorm room to freshen up the old underarm deodorant and noticed I had several voicemails. College in the late 90s. Listened to them, and another friend from high school asked me to give her a call. Called her back and she asked me if I remembered that girl I had a crush on in high school. Said her name. She said, yeah. Did you hear what happened to her? I joked, yeah, she got engaged. Ran into her last night and she asked me to hang out with them, but I had things to do earlier this morning. Girl got quiet and said she and 3 other people who were at the theater that last night had been terminated in a drunken driving accident earlier that morning. She and her boyfriend had an argument and he left. She went with the others. I'm 100% certain if I joined that evening I wouldn't be typing this tonight. Story 25. I once worked for my best friend's brother. Not for very long, as his brother ended up selling his business. Soon after, I was driving by my friend's brother's house, the old boss, who had just put a pool up and thought, be wild if I drove by and saw one of the kids fall in. My brother was a volunteer firefighter EMT, and he was stopping by my mom's after work one day. He had his radio with him. It was going nuts. All he said was he was glad he wasn't at the station at that moment, and I asked why. He said _ year-old drowning victim. It was my best friend's nephew at his brother's house I had driven past on the way home, a couple hours before. The next year, I was texting my brother while I was at a new job working second shift. He was going out to ride, and I was asking if I could give him some cash to give a mutual friend for helping work on my car. There was a break in the conversation, and when I looked at my phone after I sent the last text message, I felt like something was wrong. A couple hours later, I got a call from my mom about a motorcycle accident on the news, and no one could get a hold of my brother. I was at a gas station, just left the coffee, and drove as calmly as I could to my brother's house. PD came to notify us around midnight that the rider on the news was my brother. Story 26. I've had a few about people that turned out to be true. First was my sister's ex-boyfriend. My other sister and I just got a weird vibe from him. Turns out he was married and had my sister as a side girl without her knowledge. Another was this girl that came into my friends group. Everyone really liked her. She was very outgoing and seemingly a decent person. Then she started accusing one of my friends, who moved in with her, of stealing. My friend had literally no reason to stealing any of the cow was being accused of stealing. This was causing my friend serious stress. When COVID hit, this same nutjob went on an anti-vax vendetta, bombarding my other friends with anti-vax literature from quack doctors. She ended up giving a bunch of people COVID because she went to a party even though she fully knew she had COVID. When confronted, she played the victim. I can't explain, but both were just weird gut feelings about these people's character. They were always seemingly friendly and never said anything out of step. It was literally just the vibe I was picking up from them. On a lighter note, for some reason I just knew Argentina was going to win the last World Cup. Story 27. I'm a teacher in Australia who as a graduate couldn't find work due to a very poor job market. Then spent 14 years first emergency teaching, and then on short-term contracts. Had 2 kids and time off during this time. And as myself and my husband planned to buy our second house and relocate back to our home city, I was on my way to a job in the third one that I would attend that week. I just had this weird gut feeling come over me as I drove on the freeway and saw a rainbow appear in the sky very suddenly. Then I had the most calm and comfortable interview I'd ever had, and trust me, I'd been through many in the past. And I not only got the job, but I now have permanent secure employment there. Which is a big deal for someone who once nearly quit the industry, who once dealt with a very toxic culture at another school in the past, and whose self-esteem was once to hell as a result of the lack of jobs. It was like as if there was just this feeling and sign that this one finally was the place. This may not seem like much, but to me it was sort of an out-of-this-world feeling on the way there. Story 28. I once, years ago, had a really vivid dream, randomly, about a family friend and woman my brother and mother worked with. I rarely spoke to this person. It's even rarer these days. I actually only met her a few times. We occasionally chatted on FB. I think there was a mutual attraction since we became FB friends, but it had been months at this point since we last spoke. As I woke up, I thought to myself, that was a vivid dream, how weird. And why her? Literally seconds later, I get a FB Messenger notification from her that read, "Oi, get out of my dreams, you!" Turns out she'd had a similar dream. Makes me go cold thinking about it. Story 29. With my second pregnancy, I had a feeling something wasn't totally right, so I told my hubs not to touch me until our 20-week ultrasound. I couldn't explain what made me think that because everything felt totally normal, but it was just a thought I had. Turns out my placenta was over top of my cervix. For anyone who doesn't know, it's definitely not supposed to be there. And my OB labeled my nether regions a no-fly zone, his exact words LOL, until they could do another ultrasound and see if it moved out of the way. It did. Otherwise, the pregnancy was totally normal, but it's interesting that my body kind of already knew. Story 30. 2 things. Mine's minor. My husband goes into the office once a week, and it's around a 2-hour drive. One morning he left, and I couldn't shake the severe anxiety I was having about him driving there. I was so worried. When I told him later that day, he said a car almost rear-ended him, and it skidded, and a car in another lane almost crashed into him as well. Thankfully, it was all okay, just a close call. Second, my cousin told me she had a feeling she was going to pass away. I was like? A few months later, she had an ectopic pregnancy and the fallopian tube burst. She lost liters and liters of blood and very nearly passed away in hospital. Story 31. I have learned not to discount that little gut feeling that tells me something might go wrong. Just for a not-too-serious example, I had gotten a new car, and that weekend, my daughter and I went out of town. Everywhere we went, I was careful about where I parked so no one would bump it. At the last stop of the day, I pulled into a regular parking space. Something told me to park somewhere else, but I thought, nah, no one's gonna hit it. It's been fine all day and I'm just being overcautious. I came back out to see a big ding in my door. Okay, as I said, it's not too serious, but just a lesson. Don't ignore that feeling. Story 32. One night around 10 years ago, I was trying to fall asleep but couldn't get comfortable and kept tossing and turning. I was really hot that night, even though it wasn't a particularly warm night, and decided to sleep with my bedroom window open. Had this weird gut feeling someone was going to try to break in, but just put it down to being paranoid. Lo and behold, about 2 hours later, I heard a rustling noise at the back door downstairs directly under my bedroom. I looked out the window and saw 2 guys with hoods up whispering and trying to quietly get the back door open. Adrenaline took over, and I screamed at them to GTFO of the garden, and they ran away. I still can't figure out how I just knew what was going to happen before it happened, though.